Routes. So I've worked in Kamloops, I've worked in Clearwater, I'm getting to know these communities, and I just came back from a journey with a bunch of other climate protectors up that entire pipeline route, and we got back yesterday morning, 1 in the morning, not last night, but the night before. And I want to tell you a little bit about that, because I've heard that only a percentage of the population responds to the facts. The facts are really important, and my colleague Dr. Tim Tuccaro has explained some of these facts on numerous occasions about climate change and the connections to health and to the connections to this pea soup we're standing in today. But I've also heard that a lot of the people respond more to emotional reasons and stories. So I'm going to try to tell some stories about our trip. So we left here to support the incredibly brave Secwepemc First Nations women up the pipeline route who are trying to stop this pipeline from going through their unceded territory. And we went in solidarity with the incredibly brave Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish First Nations here who've been leading the fight and taking care of this inlet for tens of thousands of years. So, but we need everybody now, because look where we're at. We've got an air quality warning of 10+, which is the highest that can be given. My research colleagues in Kamloops at Thompson Rivers University have a more detailed type of air quality measurement, and we're actually at about 30 out of 10 or 40 out of 10, which means that this month we're up there with the worst air quality in the world, up there with Beijing. And this is not normal. This is not a new normal we're willing to accept. So, back to our trip. I left here straight from the courthouse where Jane Sonson and Susan Lambert and the other incredibly brave arrestees went to jail last week. And then we packed up the car and we headed up along the pipeline route. And one of the first stops we made was on a First Nation in the Lower Mainland still, to pick up some salmon. And it's really to take to the Secwepemc women in their encampment up with the tiny house warriors, where they're holding ground in their territory. So it's really important to think about that this pipeline jeopardizes the healthy food of all the Indigenous people who still depend on salmon. And if any of those 900 watercourses that the pipeline is supposed to cross leaks, the salmon will be contaminated, and that food will not be safe to eat. And we saw a boat capsize in the Fraser River just last week, or this month, and in the middle of the Sockeye Run. So these risks from petrochemical being shipped around are real. And then we also met a young father who had a 26-day-old newborn and couldn't bring him outside to meet us because it was unsafe to bring a baby outside, and that baby had to stay indoors. So this summer we have parents all across the province who are having to keep their children indoors because it's not safe to breathe this air. And it is the youngest among us and the oldest among us, and those with chronic illnesses, who are the most vulnerable to end up in the hospital from this kind of air quality that we've got going on. And then we continued on, and we saw the forest fires burning on the hills, and we had to make a pit stop, and we were actually afraid. We were unsure of whether the fire we saw was coming towards us. We had to ask some local road workers whether we were even safe to take a break at the side of the highway, and fortunately the fire wasn't moving right across the road towards us, and we were able to keep going. But then when we visited the Secwepemc women, we heard about how, they're really worried about the safety of their women and girls. Amnesty International is worried about the safety of their women and girls from the man camps that are supposed to be built up there if this pipeline actually starts construction. And we have a national crisis of murdered and missing women, that this will not have that problem, because some of those men will not behave appropriately, and they have a track record of not behaving appropriately, and it puts everyone in jeopardy. And even the men who may not assault any women and girls often come back drug addicted or alcohol addicted, because those man camps are not healthy places to live for anybody. So then we went all the way up to Mount Robson, and we could barely see it, but we could see the glaciers on the tops of the mountains, and we thought about the drinking water, and this is where our drinking water comes from. Even Vancouver's drinking water comes from the alpine up there. And if we don't take care of our climate, the snowfields won't be there, and they will not give us clean drinking water. And if this pipeline ruptures, then that drinking water is further endangered, because it can break over aquifers, which is another concern. And it doesn't really matter where this pipeline spills. If it spills in the headwaters, it jeopardizes, people's salmon. If it spills further down, it jeopardizes the drinking water aquifers. If it spills here, where we're in an earthquake zone, it's even more dangerous and horrendous, because the pipes will burst, and they have burst in other earthquake zones around the world. And this tank farm and this loading area that's proposed for construction is a genuine risk for explosion, where the hydrocarbons will flow into this inlet or into the neighborhoods. And dilbit is worse than other forms of oil, because it's not oil. It's a type of tar that's been diluted with neurotoxins and carcinogenic chemicals, among them benzene, which causes cancer, and we know that. And these neighborhoods are all at risk, because those chemicals evaporate and lift and go over the neighborhoods if there's a spill. We've just been incredibly lucky that we haven't had our major quake here yet, but we all know it can come at any time. So people who say, oh, we've already got a pipeline, what's the problem with doubling it? They don't understand that we just haven't had our major quake, which would rupture many of the pipes and expose everybody. This community cannot be evacuated, because if dilbit spills, it's so flammable and so explosive that you can't use your cell phone, and you can't start your car, and you can't walk through your neighborhood. So how are hundreds of thousands of people going to be evacuated from Burnaby if there's a spill or an explosion or a fire in this community? Even if it doesn't spill here and it gets loaded on these tankers that are proposed, a tanker a day under a tight bridge there, barely fits under the Second Narrows Bridge, can't even fill up to 100%, has to go under with 80% full, because it'll hit the bottom. So, and it's a 20-minute window where the ship can make it under the bridge at high tide. So if something goes wrong and that tanker doesn't make it under, it literally lands on the bottom of the inlet and breaks up, and then dilbit will be everywhere in our harbor and flowing out to sea, because we all know how quickly the tides go in and out of here. The whole Salish Sea will be full of bitumen. And bitumen can't be cleaned up. It's not like conventional oil where you can clean up 10% of it. This, you probably can't clean up any of it. Even when you talk about conventional oil up in Alaska, the Exxon Valdez spill, decades later, you can turn over the rocks and the oil is still there. And the pod of whales that live up there haven't had any offspring since the spill, which means they're headed for extinction. There are just a few whales that are older that can't produce offspring because the area is still so toxic.